My cheating wife believed that revenge would be merciless, that fury and lack of control would take over me, but she was wrong. While she laughed, thinking she had gotten away with the well-crafted lie, I kept a serene smile on my face. The day I discovered everything started like any other. I woke up with that feeling of tranquility of someone who believes they are building a life with the right person. It's funny how love blinds us, how it deceives and deceives, creating the false illusion that happiness is at our side, that those smiles and caresses are genuine. It didn't take long for me to start realizing something was wrong, and it's amazing how small signs start to speak loudly, messages received late at night, muffled laughter in the shower while your cell phone is in your hands, excuses to go out alone under the pretense of work or meetings with friends. Sometimes I questioned her, but she always responded firmly, confidently, as if she were above suspicion. "You're suspicious for no reason," she said, with that smile that I once thought was sweet, but now became increasingly bitter. I played the role of understanding husband for a while, waiting for her to be honest, to confess what was happening. Maybe he would even beg for my forgiveness. But that never happened. On the contrary, she continued, as if the betrayal were a game, a diversion that added flavor to her routine, and I kept silent, suffocating the pain. Inside me, every night by your side was a torment. Every touch, every kiss, was a cruel reminder that that woman no longer belonged to me, that my trust had been thrown away. It was on one of those nights, while she was sleeping next to me, that I made the decision that it all needed to end. I got closer to her, watched her for long minutes, trying to understand where everything went wrong, trying to figure out when she had stopped being the woman I loved to become someone who stabbed me in the back. My mind was spinning, the scenes of the two of us together played like a tragic movie, but something inside me screamed louder. I needed to be cold, I needed to act without her waiting. There would be no shouting, there would be no fights. I would surprise her in the way she least expected. And that's when I started planning my exit. I decided not to confront her right away. I needed to know more, I needed to be sure of every detail. And then, I began watching her every move like never before, like a private investigator watching a suspect. I checked her cell phone while she was distracted. I read the messages. "I miss you," she said to the other. "When will I see you again?" My heart was crushed, but instantly hardened. There was no more room for love, no more room for regrets. There was a day when she invented yet another excuse: "I'm going out with a friend for dinner." And so I followed her. I didn't have to go far to see a stranger's car waiting for her on the corner. She came in, hugged him, and the two kissed like lovers who couldn't wait to be together again. It hurt, like 1,000 knives piercing my skin, but it was also liberating. There, I finally knew that she was no longer mine. That woman who one day promised to love and honor me had broken all her vows and my trust. I could have lost control. I could have confronted them both right there, I could have caused a scandal that would have ended with everyone in tears and screams. But no, my silence would be the most powerful weapon. I remained calm, returned home and waited for her to return. When he arrived, he pretended to be tired, he pretended that he had spent a pleasant evening with a random friend, without knowing that I had already seen the whole truth. And I smiled. Like nothing was wrong, like I believed every word she said. For weeks, I continued to act like the perfect husband, making plans for the future, pretending to believe the lies she told. Meanwhile, in secret, I prepared every detail of my divorce. I prepared every document, every step to leave that woman and that marriage behind. And I started doing something she didn't expect, taking care of myself, reconnecting with who I was before that relationship. I met people, made new friends. I began to rebuild myself, not just as a betrayed man, but as someone who deserved to be happy again. Then the day came when everything would change. She saw me packing my things, putting my bags in the car, and her face contorted into an expression of surprise. "What are you doing?" she asked, afraid, finally realizing that the security of her lies was crumbling. "I'm leaving," I said, firm, confident, without resentment in my voice, just a tranquility that she would never understand. But, why? She insisted, trying to understand, trying to regain control. And it was at that moment that I handed over all the evidence, the messages, the photos, the records of his betrayals. She collapsed. She tried to explain herself, she tried to beg for my forgiveness, but all I could think about was the time I had wasted with her. The moment she betrayed me, she had also betrayed everything I stood for. And as she cried, as she begged for a second chance, I knew I was free. Free to start over. My decision was cold, calculated. There would be no revenge, not in the way she imagined. The best, cold dish I could serve would be to simply move on, live a full and happy life, while she would be stuck with her own mistake. And that's what I did. I signed the divorce papers, moved out of the house, and started over. I soon found someone else. A woman who made me realize that I could still love, who showed me that true love didn't need lies. But fate, with its cruel humor, took care of giving me the change I never planned. Her lover, the one who seemed so in love with her, abandoned her shortly after learning that she no longer had the resources, the stability that I provided her. Alone, without a husband, without a lover and without love, she finally found herself facing the emptiness that she herself had created. And therein lies the question that has stayed with me ever since: did she realize the weight of her choices? Was the pain I felt when being betrayed greater or less than the pain she felt when being abandoned? Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not tolerate or support any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they bring an uncomfortable truth: betrayal corrodes, destroys, and leaves deep marks on the lives of everyone involved. Get ready to dive into a powerful narrative, full of twists and turns and lessons about love, pain, and consequences. So sit back, because what comes next is a shocking story that will keep you hooked until the last second. Good story. On a sunny morning in Los Angeles, Tomas woke up next to Alice, his wife of 10 years. They had built a life together that, to everyone's eyes, seemed perfect. Tomas, a 35-year-old man, was attentive, dedicated, and made a point of surprising Alice with daily gestures of love: breakfast in bed, unexpected flowers, and little "I love you" notes scattered around the house. Alice always smiled, and her smile was everything to him. She was a charming woman, with a vibrant presence, with a natural beauty that attracted attention wherever she went. At 32 years old, Alice had a youthful air and a lightness in her eyes that made anyone believe that happiness lived there. Their routine was simple but loaded with meaning. On weekends, they walked along the beach, exchanging confidences and laughter. They shared dreams and plans for the future, such as the desire to soon expand their family. Alice, an artist, spent most of her days painting in the studio that Tomas had built especially for her at the back of the house. He admired her, sitting in a wooden chair, watching her create worlds on her canvases. "You are incredible," he often said, without sparing words of support and admiration. Tomas worked at an advertising company as creative director. The work was exhausting, but he always made sure to be home in time for dinner. Alice, in turn, loved cooking for both of them and preparing new recipes, filling the kitchen with aromas of seasonings and spices. They sat at the table, sometimes in silence, other times immersed in deep conversations about art, life, and their prospects for the future. Simple moments, but full of complicity and affection. Tomas felt that every day with her was a gift. However, even in the most solid relationship, nuances begin to emerge over time. Tomas sometimes noticed that Alice seemed distant, looking out the window with a pensive look. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, but she always gave vague answers. "Nothing important," he replied, smiling as if he could dispel any worry with that sweet gesture. Tomas didn't want to insist, as he believed in the trust they had in each other. But deep down, he began to feel a slight discomfort, a twinge of insecurity that he quickly pushed aside, convincing himself that it was just a phase. Their relationship began to subtly change when Alice decided to get involved in a new artistic project that consumed her for hours. "It's my big chance to exhibit my art in the gallery of my dreams," she said excitedly, her eyes shining. Tomas was happy for her and went out of his way to support her, even if it meant spending more nights alone while she was at the studio or attending events and meetings related to the project. He noticed that Alice was different, more excited, more confident, and attributed this to the imminent success of her career. "This is your moment, Alice," he said, holding her hand affectionately. Alice seemed always busy, always on the move, like she was constantly running away from something. Tomas began to feel that they were at different rhythms, as if they lived in parallel worlds. Still, he struggled to keep the flame burning. "I tried to organize romantic dinners, weekend trips to escape the hustle and bustle of the city and intimate moments that would rekindle the love they always had. But Alice often refused, saying she was tired or needed to concentrate on work. "Things will soon calm down," she promised, kissing his forehead tenderly. Despite the small signs, Tomas refused to see anything beyond the love he felt for her. For him, it was just a phase, and he was willing to wait until everything went back to normal. In her mind, their marriage was like a strong tree that could withstand any storm. He looked at Alice with the same admiration as always, believing that, as soon as her project was completed, they would return to being the happy couple they always were. Alice, on the other hand, lived moments of intense duality. While she loved Tomas's unconditional support, she felt a restlessness inside her, something that even she couldn't quite explain. The artistic project was a way of channeling this energy, of finding herself in the midst of the whirlwind of emotions that consumed her. Sometimes she would look at Tomas and feel overwhelming guilt, as if she wasn't being honest enough, but she would quickly shake those thoughts away. "He doesn't deserve this," he thought. And he smiled again, hiding any trace of internal conflict. It was amid this scenario that new characters entered their lives. Alice's trips to meetings and artistic events became more frequent. She started mentioning names of co-workers that Tomas didn't know, new contacts, gallerists and businesspeople who seemed to be part of a reality completely different from the one he was used to. She spoke about these events with enthusiasm, but also with a certain superficiality, as if trying to ward off any deeper curiosity he might have had. "It was incredible," was all she said, without giving many details. Tomas, in turn, began to feel like a stranger in his own marriage. The routine was different, moments of intimacy were rare, and he found himself alone at home, thinking about the times when Alice was a constant presence. The previously suppressed insecurity began to grow, and he wondered if there was something he wasn't seeing, something that was unfolding right before his eyes. But I always pushed those thoughts away. After all, Alice was his wife. The woman he loved and who had promised to spend the rest of his life by his side. Little by little, the distance between them became more evident. It wasn't just physical, but emotional. Alice always seemed distracted, distant, and when Tomas tried to get closer, she closed herself off, claiming to be tired or worried about work. He tried to be understanding, he tried to keep the marriage going, but he felt like something was out of place, like there was an invisible barrier between them. Despite everything, he continued to believe in their love. "It's just a phase," he said to himself every night before going to sleep. And while Alice dedicated herself more and more to her project, Tomas dedicated himself to keeping them together, believing that, if he continued to be the perfect husband, everything would return to the way it was before. But he didn't know that he was being betrayed not only by Alice, but also by his own expectations and the blindness that love can cause. And then, one night, while Alice said she would have another meeting and Tomas was alone on the couch with a glass of wine in his hand, he began to realize that it was no longer a phase. There was something more. Something he couldn't name, but it was about to change their lives forever. Doubt and uncertainty took root, and Tomas knew that, sooner or later, he would have to confront his worst fears and discover what was really happening behind Alice's sweet eyes and perfect smile. The days passed like a blur for Tomas, while the distance between him and Alice seemed to increase with an inexplicable intensity. He noticed how she dressed more carefully, how her perfume seemed stronger on the days she went out for these supposed work meetings. When Alice walked through the door, leaving behind only the echo of her footsteps and a trail of floral perfume, he found himself trying to decipher if it was his mind betraying him or if reality was about to shatter before his eyes. On one of these nights, Tomas had an idea that made him hesitate for a few moments. Jealousy, which he always tried to contain, took over his thoughts. He decided he needed to know where Alice was really going, and before he could rationalize or regret it, he grabbed his car keys and left, keeping a safe distance as he followed her. He felt like a fool, an invader of his own life, but there was something inside him that wouldn't let him go back. When Alice finally parked the car, her heart almost stopped. She was in a sophisticated restaurant, far from the profile of a simple work meeting. He watched from afar, unnoticed. He saw her enter the restaurant, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at him in a long time. And then, she met another man. Tall, elegant, with a confidence that oozed even outside the glass walls. Tomas felt the blood rush to his head, his chest tight with anger and disbelief. For a few minutes, he just stood there, trying to process what he saw. Alice leaned in to kiss the man intimately, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Betrayal was before his eyes. Tomas did not enter the restaurant. He stayed outside, his hands shaking, trying to control the storm that was forming inside him. The pain of betrayal was like a dull blow, a punch in the stomach that took the air away. As the two laughed and exchanged caresses through the window, he found himself alone, small, as if the ground had been ripped out from under his feet. The love, the respect, all the feelings he once had for her were transformed into a confusing mixture of sadness, anger and humiliation. He didn't know how long he stood there, watching the scene, but the anger soon turned into a frightening calm. He decided he wouldn't confront Alice that night, not here, in front of that man. That would be what she expected. That would be giving her the pleasure of seeing him out of control. Instead, Tomas returned to the car, trying to think of what his next step would be, but he knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. In the days that followed, Tomas continued to act as if nothing had changed. The initial shock gave way to a cold, constant pain that he carried everywhere, like a stone in his chest. He watched Alice more and more closely, noticing the details that previously went unnoticed, the way she constantly checked her cell phone, how she always found an excuse to go out, to get away. She talked about the artistic project as if it were her top priority, as if it weren't already part of her life. Alice, on the other hand, seemed to live in a world of her own, without noticing what was going on with Tomas. She kissed him on the forehead when she left the house, without realizing that the sparkle in his eyes had disappeared, that his smiles were now mere reflections of a routine that no longer made sense. Maybe she thought she was in control, that her lie was safe, that Tomas would never find out. But he knew. And it consumed him inside. One Saturday night, Alice again invented an excuse to go out. "It's a last-minute meeting with the gallerist," she said hurriedly as she gathered her things. Tomas nodded, without asking questions. She left the house without knowing that he already knew everything, that his betrayal was open and that he was just waiting for the right moment to act. Soon after she left, Tomas sat on the sofa, alone in the living room, and made a decision. He couldn't live like this anymore, pretending everything was fine. He no longer wanted to carry the weight of that lie, that betrayal that was corroding every cell in his body. He needed to face the truth, needed to free himself from the burden Alice had placed on his shoulders. And it was that night, when the clock was already past midnight and Alice had not yet returned, that Tomas decided to confront the situation. He didn't follow her this time, he didn't wait for her to come back like the other times. He simply picked up his cell phone and called. Alice's voice was a little altered, as if she was unprepared for the call. "Hi, love," she said, trying to sound natural. "I'm just finishing up here, I'll be back soon." "No need," Tomas replied, his voice firm, emotionless. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. He knew she understood. I know, he continued, each word weighing like lead. I know everything. Alice didn't respond. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. And then, the call dropped. Tomas stood there, looking at his cell phone, without feeling the need to call again. He knew that at that moment the life they knew was over. Tomas spent the entire night awake, staring at the emptiness of the living room. The silence in the house felt heavier than ever, as if the walls knew what was happening and were stifling any possibility of peace. He wondered when he had lost his wife, at what point she had decided to seek love and companionship elsewhere. The call he had made to Alice hours ago echoed in his mind, and he knew that, from that moment on, there was no going back. Alice did not return home that night. The emptiness of his absence was almost palpable, but Tomas no longer had the strength to cry or scream. He had reached a state of cold tranquility where the only thing left was to make a final decision. In the morning, when the sun filtered through the living room curtains, he got up, took a long shower, got ready and packed his bags. I was ready to leave everything behind. While Tomas was packing his things, the phone rang. It was Alice. He hesitated for a moment before answering, wondering what excuses or lies she would tell now. When he finally answered, he heard her voice shaking on the other end. Tomas, please, we need to talk, she said, with a tone of urgency that he hadn't expected. I have nothing to talk to you about, he replied, coldly, without giving her room to try to explain herself. I already know what I need to know. Please, just listen to me. I need to see you. Her voice sounded pleading, almost desperate. I'm on my way home. Wait for me, please. Tomas considered hanging up and continuing with his plan, but a part of him wanted to hear what she had to say. Maybe it was a need to have an end to something he didn't know how to end on his own. Okay. But don't expect this to change anything, he said, then hung up. A short time later, Alice walked through the door, and Tomas felt as if he were looking at a stranger. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes were swollen from crying, and she looked exhausted, worn out from a night that he knew wasn't work. The silence between them was dense, as if the words were stones that neither of them could lift. I know you're angry, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Alice began, taking a tentative step toward him. I was wrong. And I have no excuses for what I did. Then don't try, Tomas replied, his voice cutting like a blade. You betrayed everything we had. Our vows, our trust. Why do you think I want to hear your explanations now? She shivered at the coldness of his words, but took a deep breath and continued. I was confused, lost. I thought I was looking for something outside of our marriage that would make me feel alive again. I'm not saying it's right, but I was a coward, Tomas. Tomas turned his back to her, trying to maintain control. Coward? That's an understatement for what you did. You destroyed everything, Alice. Everything. I know. Tears streamed down her face, but Tomas remained impassive, his gaze fixed on the suitcase next to the door. I know you probably hate me right now, but there's something you need to know. Something that might make this all even worse. He slowly turned to face her, his face expressionless but his eyes burning with silent anger. What could be worse than you cheating on me with another man? Alice lowered her head, as if she didn't have the strength to meet Tomas's gaze. She took a deep breath and, with her voice shaking, finally revealed the truth. The man I was with, he left me. He found out about the divorce, he knew I would lose everything, and he didn't want to be with me anymore. Tomas watched her for a moment, trying to understand what she was saying. So, now that he left you, you come looking for me. Now you want to go back as if nothing happened. No, it's not that, she stammered. I just wanted to be honest with you. I know nothing will change, I know I messed up, but I needed you to know that he cheated on me too. That I was used, Tomas. I was left aside when I was no longer useful. So that's it. Do you think I will feel sorry for you? That I will feel some compassion for the fact that you are suffering right now? That he did to you exactly what you did to me? Tomas laughed, but there was no joy in the laugh. It was bitter, filled with cruel satisfaction. Well, Alice, I think you finally had a taste of betrayal. Alice tried to get closer, trying to hold Tomas's hand, but he pushed her away. Don't touch me. Not now. Not after all this. Tomas, I just want you to know that I never stopped loving you. I know it's too late to say this, but I was wrong, and the price was high. I lost you, and now, I've lost everything. The silence that followed was like an abyss between the two, full of unspoken words, regrets and resentments that could never be resolved. Tomas looked into her eyes, searching for what he once saw in that woman, but found nothing but regret and despair. Alice was broken, vulnerable, but he no longer felt empathy for her. The love that once existed between the two had died, burned by the flames of betrayal. Tomas took a step back, picked up the suitcase he had packed and, before leaving, said, "You made your choices, Alice. Now you're going to have to live with them." And so, he walked out the door, leaving behind the woman who had once been everything to him, but who was now nothing more than a painful reminder of a life he was ready to leave behind. Alice fell to her knees on the floor, hugging herself, as if trying to hold on to the pieces of a life she herself had torn apart. The loneliness that settled around her was suffocating, and the guilt, like an unbearable weight, pressed down on her chest. She knew that nothing she said or did could erase what she had done. And now, I was alone. Alone with the pain of having betrayed the only man who truly loved her. Time seemed to drag by as she remained there, motionless, trying to understand how she had gotten to this point. How could he throw away everything they had built together for an adventure that, in the end, meant nothing? She wanted to scream, she wanted to cry, but the truth was that there were no more tears to be shed. While Alice stared at the emptiness around her, Tomas drove away, feeling a mix of freedom and pain. He knew his life would never be the same, but he also knew he couldn't continue living in the lie that their marriage had become. He was ready to move on, to rebuild his life, even if he didn't yet know how. What he didn't know was that fate had a final twist in store for Alice. One last lesson about betrayal, about choices, and about how the cold dish of revenge is often not served by those who were betrayed, but by life itself. The sound of the door slamming echoed throughout the house, and Alice felt paralyzed, as if she were trapped in a nightmare from which she could not awaken. She remained there, kneeling on the floor, listening to the silence that seemed to roar in her ears. The hours dragged on, and dawn arrived, cold and cruel, offering no comfort. The house, which was once a home, now seemed like a huge, dark void, full of memories that seemed to mock her. She stood up slowly, her body as heavy as lead, and began to walk around the house as if searching for something that could save her. He looked at the photos spread across the walls, happy moments, vacations at the coast, end-of-year parties around the Christmas tree. An entire album of a life that no longer existed, a life that she herself had destroyed. Your trembling fingers passed over a photo of Tomas smiling beside you, his eyes shining with joy and love. She couldn't hold back the tears that started streaming down her face. There, in that moment, she felt the crushing weight of her choices, felt how betrayal had taken something from her that she might never get back. That same night, while Alice was consumed by despair and remorse, Tomas drove through the empty streets, aimlessly. Anger still burned in his chest, but the pain was now mixed with a feeling of freedom and emptiness. It was as if he had lost his ground, as if all the certainty he had about love, trust and marriage had been taken from beneath his feet. He wondered if he could trust anyone again, if he could look at someone else without feeling the fear of betrayal. But those answers wouldn't come that night, so he just kept driving, trying to escape his own thoughts. The days that followed were like a fog for both of them. Tomas went to live temporarily at a friend's house, avoiding any direct contact with Alice. He got involved in the legal procedures of the divorce, seeking to cut any ties that kept him tied to her. Pride and pain kept him firm in his decision to move forward, to leave the past behind. However, there was one question that echoed in his mind over and over again: why wasn't I enough? Meanwhile, Alice tried to survive the chaos that had become her life. The lover who once seemed to be her escape from the monotony of marriage, was now nothing more than a shadow, a shameful mistake that had left her in emotional misery. He disappeared without a trace, as soon as he found out that she would lose everything in the divorce. And so, Alice found herself completely alone, having to face the reality she had created for herself. It was as if everything around him was crumbling: his reputation, his self-esteem, his dreams of a different future. She found herself questioning whether she had the strength to rebuild anything. One afternoon, as Alice was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by papers and documents that needed to be sorted out for the divorce, she realized how empty the house was without Tomas. Every room seemed to have been emptied not just of objects, but of joy and meaning. The pictures she painted herself, which previously seemed vibrant and full of life, were now nothing more than pieces of canvas hanging aimlessly. She stood up suddenly, overcome by a wave of panic. I needed to get out, I needed to breathe. She grabbed her car keys and drove to a small beach they used to frequent in the early years of their marriage. There, she sat on the sand, feeling the cold wind against her face, watching the calm movement of the waves. Alice felt as if she were adrift, as if she were one of those waves, unable to resist the current that was pulling her away. He closed his eyes and tried, for a moment, to imagine what his life would be like if he had made different choices. What it would be like if she had been content with Tomas's love, if she had faced her fears instead of running away from them. That same day, Tomas had an experience that surprised him. An old coworker invited him for coffee, saying he needed to go out for a while and have some fun. He accepted, without high expectations. The conversation between them was light, relaxed, and for a few hours he allowed himself to forget all the pain that accompanied him. It was a relief. For the first time in a long time, he felt comfortable in the presence of another person, and he realized that life could go on, that there was a light at the end of that dark tunnel. After that meeting, Tomas realized that he was ready to move on, that he could not allow the past to hold him back forever. He knew Alice was sunk in regret and pain, but now that was no longer her responsibility. She made her choices, and he needed to make his. Tomas decided to put his energy into starting over. He sought new professional opportunities, resumed old hobbies he had left behind, and reconnected with friends who had been distant for a long time. While Tomas gradually rebuilt his life, Alice faced the consequences of the decisions she made. She continued to paint, but her works now carried a weight, a darkness that had not existed before. Her paintings became reflections of her guilt and regret, as if she was trying, in some way, to express everything she felt. But professional success did not fill the void left by Tomas. Every night, as she lay in her cold, empty bed, Alice was haunted by what she had lost and knew that no matter how hard she tried, the past could not be changed. But there was something she needed to do. Something I hadn't achieved yet. She needed to see Tomas one last time. I needed to face him and say everything I never managed to say. Not to ask for forgiveness, not to try to reconcile, but to finally close that chapter, so that both of them could, in fact, move on. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that Tomas might not want to listen to her, but it was a risk she needed to take. And so, with her heart heavy and her courage in tatters, Alice made a decision that would lead her to one last confrontation. She just didn't know that this final meeting would change everything, in a way that none of them expected. Alice felt a weight in her chest as she headed to the place where she knew she could find Tomas. She learned from mutual friends that he was involved in a new project and that he used to go to a coffee shop near the office where he now worked. She hesitated to go there, fearing his reaction, but the need to close this chapter drove her. I wanted to see him one last time, to say what was still hidden, even if he didn't want to hear it. She needed to face the man she had betrayed, the man she still loved, even though she knew there was no chance of redemption. Tomas was sitting at the back of the cafe, with his laptop open, absorbed in his work. Life for him was starting over in a new, different, but also scary way. He had his moments of joy, days when he believed he was finally moving on, but there were others when the pain returned, relentless, reminding him of what Alice had done. He didn't expect to see her there, but when she walked in and their eyes met, the world around her seemed to stop for an instant. He felt his stomach sink, as if the past had come back to haunt him. But there was something different about him now, a strength, a coolness that he had acquired in the months after the divorce. Alice approached slowly, with feigned calm, trying to appear stronger than she really was. Can I sit down?" she asked, almost in a whisper. Tomas took a deep breath and nodded, pulling out the chair for her. "Just a minute, Alice. Say what you came to say, but know that it won't change anything." She swallowed hard. I knew he was right, that nothing he said could erase what happened, but he still needed to try. "I know that I deserve nothing from you, neither forgiveness nor understanding. I just needed to see you. I needed to look you in the eye and say I'm sorry for everything I did. I'm sorry I hurt you and destroyed something as beautiful as what we had." Alice looked at Tomas's face, looking for some reaction, but he remained unshakable. "I regretted it too, Alice. For months, I regretted having believed in you, having built an entire life by your side thinking you were someone else." Tomas leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "But what makes me feel better today is knowing that what you did was throw away the only true thing I had. I've already accepted that." Alice felt his words like stabs in her chest, and she held back the tears that threatened to break out. "I know I can never fix what I did. But I wanted you to know that I really loved you. That my betrayal wasn't about you. It was about me, about how insecure, cowardly I was, about how much I didn't know what I wanted." Tomas sighed, looking away from the window. "And now you know what you want?" he asked, in a cold, almost disinterested tone. "Because honestly, Alice, I don't want to be part of your mess anymore. I freed myself from that. I met someone who made me believe that life can be light, that love can be honest. And that's what I want. A life without lies, without betrayals." Alice's eyes widened, surprised by the revelation. Part of her already knew he could be with someone else, but hearing that from his mouth was like a shock. Reality hit her like a tsunami. Tomas had truly moved on, while she was still stuck in guilt and regret. And there, in that moment, she knew that he had truly left her behind. She nodded, trying to accept what she had heard, but her heart was beating wildly. "I'm happy for you, really," she said, even though the words burned her throat. "I hope you are happy. May this person take care of you as I should have." "She takes care of it," Tomas said, calmly. "And I take care of her. We take care of each other. Something you've never been able to do, Alice." She looked down, feeling like all the words she could say were becoming useless. She stood up, ready to leave, but then, at the last moment, she turned to him once more. "Thank you for listening to me, Tomas. Thank you for allowing me to say this. I hope you have the life you always deserved." He watched her for a moment, trying to find any trace of the woman he once loved. But all he saw was a stranger, someone who had caused immense pain but was now irrelevant. "Goodbye, Alice," he said, and then turned his attention to the laptop, indicating that the conversation was over. Alice left the cafe, and Tomas didn't look back. That afternoon, Alice drove aimlessly through the city, feeling lighter and, at the same time, devastated. She knew there was no fix for what she had done, that her mistake could not be erased. But that last encounter made her realize that, no matter how much she suffered, the best thing she could do for herself was to try to find a way to move forward. The pain was still there, and perhaps it had been for a long time, but she knew that now she was alone, free to rebuild her life, or to continue destroying it, depending on her choices. And there, while driving through the city, Alice decided that, even if she had to start from scratch, even if she needed to carry that guilt forever, she would try to be a better person. As for Tomas, he returned to work with a sense of relief. That final meeting with Alice made him realize that he was over it, that he no longer had room for her in his heart. When he returned home that night, the new woman in his life was waiting for him with a smile that was sincere, with a hug that conveyed security. And there, as he hugged her back, he knew he had made the right decision. I learned that true love wasn't about forgetting the past, but about finding someone who was willing to build a new future. And that's how it all ended, Alice, alone, but finally at peace with her choices and willing to face whatever came her way. And Tomas, free, in a new life that he rebuilt himself, now with the certainty that he deserved to be truly loved. If you made it this far, leave your comment on the story. What did you think of the character choices? And subscribe to the channel for more shocking and impactful stories like this. Remember, betrayal always leaves scars, and here we do not support any type of infidelity.